And one of the most high-profile displays of anti-Semitism of late has been on American university campuses, where anti-Israel protests have often slipped into open support for terrorism and for calls to murder Jews. Benjamin Anthony from the MirYam Institute is still with me. And Benjamin, I mean, the astonishing scenes on American universities, and they have been really astonishing. I think a lot of Americans have had a bit of a wake-up call themselves, whatever they feel about Israel. But many are now following the money. How did the students get to learn this? How did professors get to teach this blatant anti-Israel, but more than that, anti-Western ideology?
Yeah, I'm really sorry to say this, but I told you so. I've been lecturing on university campuses since 2007 in the United States of America. Now, let me give some context. When I was 14, my brother was beaten almost to death. He had to have 3 liver transplants because he's a Jew in the city of Manchester. When I went to university, I became a student campaigner during the events of the Second Intifada, and then my parents moved to Israel as Jeremy Corbyn was making a run to become Prime Minister of the UK. So there you have physical anti-Semitism, campus anti-Semitism, political anti-Semitism. I saw the seeds of all of those taking root in the United States of America. And I warned the members of American Jewry that that which we saw in Britain is now going to be transposed onto the American academic scene, and that that academic scene bleeds into the political echelons in the United States. People didn't really want to believe it. Only very, very few were able to understand that. The reality is that Jewish people in America are on the cusp not of living an existence akin to European Jews in the 1930s, but akin to the existence of the European Jewish community today. What does that look like? The inability to feel safe on campus, the inability to wear a kippah in the street, and the inability to counter the rise of anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist politicians who are elected into office. And I disagree with the report. There is a very strong strain coming from the left of the political aisle. There is some challenge on the right in the United States. There's no question about that. We all remember those scenes. But the bulk of this is coming from the left in politics, the left in academia. And in fact, now we're seeing that it's actually there even in the high schools.
And Qatar has been very defensive and said that, you know, we're not funding these programs. This isn't us. This isn't anything to do with us. But when you look at the foreign funding, they are the #1 donor to a lot of these schools.
Yeah, of course they are. And that's what happens when you run your education system like it's a business rather than a non-for-profit or rather than a conscientious endeavor. The Americans have accepted massive amounts of funding. And by the way, before the Qataris, who are certainly doing it, the Saudis were doing the same. It comes with strings attached, and nobody should be surprised that there is a 5th column now on American campuses. But the most horrific aspect of all of it is that many of those who power these protests are anti-Israel, self-loathing Jews. That needs to be tackled as well.
What about the way that President Biden spoke out on this last week? What about the way that the politicians have tried to get a handle on this?
I appreciate when President Biden says that there's no place for this on the university campuses, but that's mere rhetoric. It's not a serious policy. What people need to understand is that these anti-Israel protests on the campuses, they're also anti-American protests as well. In our organization, as an example, we work with the military academies because the military academies in the US have 3 pillars that we find very, very positive. They're not allowed to protest in support of a terror organization, otherwise they'll be expelled. Who would have thought that a standard such as that was required? But it is. They're not allowed to protest in opposition to an ally of the United States. But more importantly, Laura, they are not allowed to accept a penny of foreign funding. That's where real leadership's going to come from. What's coming out of these campuses is actually spelling, in my opinion, the swift demise of the United States writ large, because the students of today will be the policymakers of tomorrow, and they are being educated in environments that are hostile to Israel, hostile towards Jews, and hostile towards the United States.
All right, Benjamin, thank you.